A brilliant journalist by the name of Mark Danner was among the first to figure this out. Writing in the New York Times in October 2002, with the invasion of Iraq now on the horizon, Danner glimpsed the big picture. He wrote, quote, "Much of the confusion surrounding the Iraq debate thus far is owed to the chasm between the justifications proffered and the more elaborate geopolitical enterprise motivating many in the Bush administration." Overthrowing the Taliban in Afghanistan had been only a preliminary step. The decisive phase now, quote, "about to unfold in the Persian Gulf envisions the remaking of the Middle East," wrote Danner. Danner cited an off-the-cuff remark by Paul Wolfowitz in which the Deputy Secretary of Defense had promised that Iraq would be, quote, "the first Arab democracy." Waiting in the wings, presumably, was a second Arab democracy, and a third, and a fourth, and perhaps a Persian one, each to be midwifed by the United States. Here, in effect, was a new version of the old domino theory. Instead of propping up dominoes, as the United States had sought to do during the Cold War, this time Washington was going to do the toppling, one after another. Big thinkers in the Bush administration, Danner continued, were envisioning, quote, "a post-Saddam Iraq, secular, middle-class, urbanized, rich with oil." This new Iraq would replace the, quote, "autocracy of Saudi Arabia as the key American ally in the Persian Gulf, allowing the withdrawal of United States troops from the kingdom." The presence of a victorious American army in Iraq would then serve as a powerful boost to moderate elements in neighboring Iran, hastening that critical country's evolution away from the mullahs and toward a more moderate course. Such an evolution in Tehran would lead to a withdrawal of Iranian support for Hezbollah and other radical groups, thereby isolating Syria and reducing pressure on Israel. This undercutting of radicals on Israel's northern borders and within the West Bank and Gaza would lead eventually to a favorable solution to the Arab-Israeli problem. In characterizing Washington's vision of what was to come, Danner used terms like comprehensive, prophetic, evangelical. That vision stemmed from a specific conviction that had now gripped Bush and those around him. As Danner put it, quote, "For the evil of terror to be defeated, the entire region from which it springs must be made new." Sound preposterous? Of course it was. But this preposterous expectation, remaking much of the Islamic world, actually explains why, to prevent another 9/11, the United States was targeting a country that had had nothing to do with 9/11. Go massive, sweep it all up, things related and not. So Donald Rumsfeld has instructed his subordinates in a note written on 9/11 itself. In Iraq, the big sweep would begin, but it would not end there. Retired General Wesley Clark, who had commanded NATO forces during the Kosovo campaign, reported visiting a friend in the Pentagon just weeks after 9/11 itself. The decision to invade Iraq had already been made, the friend reported, but that was just the beginning. Let's introduce General Clark's own testimony into the proceedings.
And by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So go through the countries again?
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
Not long after 9/11, Paul Wolfowitz mused that Afghanistan was, quote, not a particularly satisfying place to wage a war. Afghanistan was not very satisfying because, in Wolfowitz's words, since it was so primitive, there were few targets. Also, a war in Afghanistan didn't lead anywhere. By contrast, Iraq offered plenty of targets. And in the imaginings of Wolfowitz and others, it did lead somewhere. Baghdad was just the right place to begin making the Islamic world anew. To put it another way, the Bush administration targeted the Saddam Hussein regime, not because it was strong and dangerous, but because it was weak and vulnerable. Iraq was low-hanging fruit, the perfect place to validate the Bush doctrine of preventive war and to show who was going to be the big kahuna in the post-9/11 world. Iraq, in other words, offered an ideal venue for launching the big sweep that would change the Islamic world. Think about it. Back in 1991, coalition forces had given Saddam's army a thorough drubbing. Throughout the decade that followed, crushing sanctions had kept Iraq isolated and flat on its back. By 2003, the army that had proven to be less than formidable during Operation Desert Storm was now most assuredly weaker still. All wars entail an element of uncertainty. But given Iraq's manifest vulnerabilities, the uncertainties related to invading Iraq appeared minimal. As one proponent of war wrote in a famous Washington Post op-ed, the coming war against Saddam promised to be a cakewalk. The apparent outcome of Operation Enduring Freedom reinforced such optimism. Having ousted the Taliban, Bush and those around him thought that the United States now controlled Afghanistan. They fancied that they had accomplished in a matter of weeks what an occupying Soviet army had failed to achieve over the course of a decade. Here was yet another perception that proved wildly erroneous. Still, during the run-up to Iraq, the belief that Afghanistan was firmly in the win column reinforced the enthusiasm for having a go at Saddam. So victory in Iraq appeared to be a foregone conclusion. The key issue was to gain that victory in a fashion that would set up the steps that would follow. The imperative was not just to win, but to win big, demonstrating to the American people and to the world at large that preventive war worked as advertised, or at least worked when implemented by U.S. forces.